On February 7th, 2025, Washington pulled the pin on a grenade that hit the gun world almost overnight. President Trump signed an order called Protecting Second Amendment Rights, and it wasn't some empty photo op. It kicked off a federal rollback that is already changing what law-abiding gun owners can buy, keep, and carry. Quick check before we go any further. Are you subscribed yet? If not, hit subscribe right now because what I'm about to unpack could affect you directly. This is one of those stories you do not want to hear about after the rules have already changed. A lot of people heard about that order and shrugged because politicians sign papers all the time. Most of those papers never leave the headline stage, and they fade out before regular people feel anything. This one didn't fade out, and that's exactly why so many gun owners still don't realize how much moved behind the scenes. Trump came back into office on January 20th, 2025, with a very public promise about firearms. He said nobody was going to lay a finger on the guns of law-abiding Americans while he was there. That was a bold line, and 3 weeks later, he moved from campaign language to federal action. The order did one thing that made gun owners sit up fast once they understood it. It told Attorney General Pam Bondi to review every major federal move tied to gun policy from 2021 through 2025. Not one rule, not one memo, but the full stack of regulations, enforcement moves, and court positions. Think about how big that really is for a second. That means the new administration wasn't just saying, "We like the Second Amendment," and leaving it there. It was saying, "Go find every place the last team pushed too far and tell me how to unwind it." That matters because the previous 4 years left gun owners feeling boxed in from several directions at once. Rules tightened, dealers felt pressure, court fights piled up, and everyday owners had to guess what might change next. For a lot of people, it felt less like one law and more like a slow squeeze coming from every side. Before I get into the first rollback, quick question. Subscribed yet? You're going to want notifications on for this. The fine print matters here, and most people never hear about it until somebody gets burned. One of the earliest changes hit the people most gun owners rely on without thinking about it much. I'm talking about licensed gun dealers, the local shops that handle purchases, transfers, background checks, and questions. When those shops get squeezed, the damage doesn't stay behind the counter. It spreads straight to the customer. Under the Biden-era zero-tolerance approach, a gun shop could be staring at disaster over basic paperwork mistakes. Not some violent crime, not trafficking, not a criminal conspiracy, but a clerical error on federal forms. That kind of pressure made small dealers feel like one bad day could wipe out the business completely. If you've never run a small business, it's easy to miss how chilling that is. Fear changes behavior fast, and a shop owner who feels hunted doesn't expand, hire, or take chances. Some close down, some stop doing certain transfers, and some decide the whole thing just isn't worth it anymore. Then on April 7th, 2025, that zero-tolerance policy was repealed. That didn't mean dealers got a free pass to ignore the law, and that's not the point here. It meant the federal government stopped treating every mistake like grounds for a business death sentence. That is a huge difference for the gun owner standing on the other side of the glass counter. More dealers staying open means more places to buy, more places to transfer, and fewer bottlenecks in the system. It also means small-town buyers don't lose their nearest shop because somebody filled out one line wrong. And this is where the story stops sounding abstract and starts hitting wallets. On July 4th, 2025, a bill called the One Big Beautiful Bill Act carried something gun owners had wanted for decades. Buried inside it was the removal of the $200 tax tied to certain NFA items. That fee had been hanging around since 1934. 91 years is a long time for one charge to sit there shaping what people do and don't buy. Whole generations of gun owners looked at that extra cost and decided the hassle, delay, and money were just too much. For people new to this, we're talking about things like suppressors, short-barreled rifles, and short-barreled shotguns. The National Firearms Act put special taxes and registration burdens on those categories long ago. So when that $200 tax disappears, it doesn't solve everything, but it knocks down a very real barrier. That matters more than some people think, because price changes behavior even when rights stay on paper. A right that exists but stays locked behind extra cost, extra paperwork, and extra waiting can feel distant fast. When the price wall comes down, more ordinary owners can actually consider options they used to write off immediately. Now, to be clear, removing a tax doesn't erase every rule around those items. It doesn't mean skip paperwork, ignore your state law, or pretend local restrictions vanished with a federal signature. But it does mean one of the oldest financial roadblocks in modern gun policy just got smashed apart. The next shift may be the one that made the most people exhale all at once. On July 17, 2025, the Trump administration dropped the federal appeal defending the Biden pistol brace rule. That one sentence carries a lot of weight if you understand how many people were hanging under that cloud. The information I'm about to share could literally save you during a traffic stop. But first, are you subscribed? If not, do that now, because this next part is where everyday life and federal policy collide hard. Back in 2023, the pistol brace rule tried to reclassify huge numbers of braced pistols in practical terms. In plain English, the government was saying many owners might now be holding what counted as short-barreled rifles, and under federal law, that kind of reclassification can drag in registration rules, taxes, and major criminal risk. That's why the reaction was so intense. Millions of people had bought those setups legally, followed the rules they were given, and thought they were fine. Then suddenly the ground moved, and many feared they could become accidental felons without ever intending to break anything. That phrase, accidental felon, sounds dramatic until you picture how these cases really happen. A person buys a legal item, stores it normally, drives with it, or takes it to the range. Then a rule changes. The notice doesn't reach them clearly, and now a routine encounter turns into a nightmare. When the administration dropped the appeal, it effectively stopped defending that brace rule in the fight. That doesn't mean every possible state issue vanished, and it doesn't mean ignore local law where you live. But at the federal level, one of the biggest recent threats hanging over ordinary owners lost its engine. Picture a driver heading home after a range day with a legally purchased firearm in the vehicle. Maybe he crosses a county line. Maybe he gets stopped for a broken taillight. Maybe the officer asks questions. If the law changed quietly and he never caught it, that simple traffic stop could become a life-changing event. That is why this topic matters beyond politics and internet arguments. For regular people, these rules touch the trunk of the car, the drive to the range, and the road trip. They affect whether you can explain your setup calmly or whether you're suddenly trying to decode a legal minefield. And if you travel between states, the stakes get even higher. Federal relief can improve your position, but it does not automatically erase what one state decides to criminalize. So the same firearm setup that feels normal at home can become a serious problem after one border sign passes by. Another major move came on November 12, 2025, and it hit a group that many people felt had been treated unfairly. Trump signed a bill reversing an older policy that could block some veterans from buying guns. The trigger for that block was not always a violent record or a dangerous act, but help managing benefits. That's what made this so frustrating to many gun owners and veteran families. A veteran could need assistance handling money and still be law-abiding, stable, and never accused of threatening anyone. Yet that financial help could push them into a system that treated them like they should lose a core right. Reversing that policy sent a clear message about how rights should be handled. Needing help with finances is not the same as being a criminal, and it is not proof of dangerous intent. For many people, this correction was about basic fairness as much as it was about gun policy. Then came what may be the biggest long-term development of the whole story. On December 4, 2025, the Department of Justice opened a new office inside its Civil Rights Division, and one major part of its mission was to challenge laws seen as violating the Second Amendment. Pause on that, because the importance of it can slip by if you hear it too fast. For years, gun owners often had to rely on private groups, outside lawyers, and donations to push these fights. Now the federal government itself was stepping into the arena on the side of expanding gun rights. That is not a tiny bureaucratic shuffle. That is a deep shift in posture because the same government that once defended restrictions is now helping attack some of them. When the Department of Justice changes direction like that, the legal map can start moving in a very different way. Private groups still matter, of course, and they've carried a lot of these battles for years. But when government lawyers also start challenging restrictions, the pressure on states and agencies can grow much faster. It changes resources, changes momentum, and changes how future court fights may even be framed. Here's something crazy. 87% of people watching right now aren't subscribed. Don't be part of that statistic. If you care about staying ahead of fast-moving gun law changes, hit subscribe now before the next update slips past you. Now, before anybody gets too comfortable, this is the part where we have to stay honest. Federal wins are real, but they do not magically freeze the country into one clean, simple set of rules. Some of these moves can be challenged, some can be narrowed, and some can be reversed later by a new administration. That's the trap a lot of people fall into after a big political win. They celebrate once, assume the fight is over, and stop paying attention to what states are doing underneath them. Meanwhile, State legislatures, governors, and courts keep moving, and sometimes they move in completely opposite directions. That split is already easy to see. Virginia has pushed a semi-auto ban toward the governor's desk, while other places keep debating broader carry rights. Michigan has fought over constitutional carry, and Oregon has stayed in the middle of a long battle over Measure 114. So yes, the federal picture looks meaningfully better for gun owners than it did not long ago. But your day-to-day reality still depends heavily on your zip code, your travel plans, and what your state just passed. That's why people who only follow national headlines can get blindsided by rules that hit close to home. And when I say close to home, I mean real life, not online debates. I mean the store where you buy, the county where you drive, and the state line you cross visiting family. One unnoticed change can turn a normal purchase, transport, or carry decision into a legal mess you never saw coming. That brings us to the next thing moving through the conversation, even if it hasn't become law. In March of 2026, Senator Mike Lee introduced the National Constitutional Carry Act. If it ever passed, it would aim to stop states from punishing citizens simply for carrying a firearm in public. In plain terms, that points toward national constitutional carry. No permit requirement imposed by the state, no state-created training demand just to carry in public, coast to coast. That is a massive idea, and even its introduction tells you how far the conversation has shifted in a short time. Will that bill pass as written? Nobody can promise that, because politics is messy, votes move, and big proposals draw big resistance. But its very existence shows something important. The center of pressure in this debate is moving toward broader gun rights, not away from them. That shift matters because politics often changes in stages before the average person notices. First, the language changes, then the legal arguments change, then agency behavior changes, and finally daily life starts changing too. We are in that kind of moment now where ideas that once sounded out of reach are being pushed openly. Still, none of this means relax and stop checking the rules that affect you. A bill can be introduced and die, a court can step in, and a future administration can pull hard the other way. Rights can advance, stall, or get narrowed depending on who is writing policy and who is hearing the case. And that's why staying informed is not paranoia. It's protection for the person who wants to obey the law, keep their rights, and avoid being trapped by shifting rules. Nobody is warning you in real time when every fine print change happens, and that's exactly what makes it dangerous. Think about the practical side of this for a moment. The dealer policy change affects whether your local shop survives, whether transfers stay available, and how easy legal purchases remain. The tax change affects cost, which affects whether regular owners can even consider certain lawful firearm options at all. The brace fight affects something even more personal. It affects the risk that a firearm you bought in good faith becomes the center of a legal problem later. That is why people react so strongly to these rulings, because the danger is not abstract when it reaches your car door. The veteran policy reversal matters in a different but equally human way. It says rights should not be stripped by broad assumptions about people who served their country and asked for financial help. For many families, that isn't just policy cleanup. It feels like overdue respect finally showing up. And the DOJ office matters because court fights shape what survives long after one news cycle ends. If federal lawyers spend years challenging anti-gun restrictions, the impact could outlast one speech or one election season. That is how legal landscapes really change. Slowly in courtrooms, then suddenly in the lives of regular people. Now imagine two gun owners with the same firearm setup, bought the same way, stored the same way. One lives in a state that lines up with the federal shift, and the other lives in a state pushing harder against it. Their legal reality can look wildly different, even though neither person sees himself as doing anything unusual. That's why travel deserves real attention in this conversation. You might be perfectly legal leaving your driveway, then enter a state where transport, carry, or configuration rules change sharply. And if you don't know that before the trip, the lesson may arrive with flashing lights in your rearview mirror. None of this is a call to test boundaries or play games with unclear laws. It is the opposite. It is a reminder that responsible gun owners need current information, careful habits, and a clear picture of their own state's rules. Because the truth is simple and a little uncomfortable. A right you don't understand can be taken from you in practice, long before it disappears on paper. If you don't know what changed, when it changed, and where it changed, you are operating half-blind. That is why this February 7th order mattered so much from the start. It wasn't just symbolic support for the Second Amendment, and it wasn't just a talking point for one speech. It was the starting signal for a series of real actions that touched dealers, buyers, carriers, veterans, and ongoing court fights. In a short span, Gun owners saw the zero-tolerance dealer policy scrapped. They saw the old NFA tax barrier removed for certain items after more than 9 decades. They saw the federal government stop defending the brace rule and start building legal muscle on the other side. That is a serious change in the landscape, no matter where you stand politically. You can dislike the people involved, love them, or stay out of the political fight entirely. What you cannot do is pretend nothing changed, because the rules around ownership and enforcement clearly did. And yet this is not a movie ending where the credits roll and the battle is over. Some of these gains will be tested in court, some will meet fierce state resistance, and some may depend on future elections. That means the smartest gun owner is not the loudest one, but the one who keeps paying attention. Not the one who assumes yesterday's law still controls today. Not the one who hears one headline and stops reading. And definitely not the one who learns about a legal shift only after an officer, a prosecutor, or a judge brings it up first. For everyday Americans, that's the personal stake in this whole story. This is about whether you can make lawful choices with confidence instead of second-guessing every step after a rule changes. It's about whether you stay on the safe side of the law while the law itself keeps moving beneath your feet. So when people say the federal government handed gun owners one of the biggest wins in decades, this is what they mean. They mean a real rollback began, not just one promise on camera. They mean the pressure points changed in buying, carrying, classification fights, court strategy, and access to lawful ownership. That should matter to anyone who cares about the Second Amendment in practical terms, not just emotional ones. Not because every problem is solved, and not because every state will follow the same path tomorrow, but because the baseline is different now, and pretending otherwise leaves you dangerously behind the curve. If you own firearms, plan to buy them, carry them, or travel with them, this story is about you. It is about your money, your choices, your risk, and your ability to stay inside the law while rules keep shifting. That is why staying informed is not optional anymore. It is part of responsible ownership itself, and that is the biggest takeaway from all of this. A piece of paper signed on February 7, 2025, set off a chain of changes that made the federal picture friendlier to gun owners. But the people who benefit most will be the ones who keep watching closely, stay careful, and refuse to get caught sleeping. Everything here is for educational purposes, and gun laws still vary hard from state to state. So be smart, stay responsible, and check the law where you live and where you travel before making any move. Because rights only protect you when you know them, and the cost of not knowing can hit all at once.